I'm Steve Hanson, originally from Monroe County in Ellettsville, Indiana. Been in sales most all my life and sold watercraft, motorcycles, ATVs, but I've been strictly boats for the last 6 or 7 years. I've been in here in Shelby County, I think, for now 7 years, and I really enjoy what I do. And here I'm Brownies Marine's lead salesperson. We specialize in all of the boats that are sold by White River Marine Group. We are a fourth generation family owned business, and we've been here for over 40 years in this same location. I think our longevity in this spot attributes a lot to our success.
My name is Perry Osman. I was born and raised in this area. I've owned and operated Osman Body Shop for about 38 years, and we live north of here, but we've also got property on the river over on White River we stay at in the summer, and we got some rentals we call White River Rentals.
My name is Lori Gaff, and I live in Heidenhammer, Texas. Although I was brought up in Kansas, I have deep Texas roots dating back to the 1800s. My background is rather diverse. I started off working in graphic design at Fort Rucker and Fort Hood, Texas, and then at age 30 I joined the Army and became an Army aviator flying Black Hawk helicopters. I was super lucky to get assigned to the B Troop Outlaws with 21st Cavalry Brigade at Fort Hood, Texas, and we spent a year flying top-level military leaders in Iraq, and then we came home and flew President Bush here in the States. Then after that, I was actually a member of the Louisiana National Guard, so in doing that, we flew quite a few missions that carried us across the Mississippi River. More recently, I've become involved in forensic genealogy and helped solve over 40 cases of Jane and John Does with that DNA Doe Project organization.
I grew up in Ellettsville, which is a really small town, small high school, so and Barry was a couple of grades ahead of me, but you knew everybody in the little town, and walking down the street, if you seen a kid, you knew his parents, and just known Barry really through school all my life, and we reconnected through social media. Barry and I actually met in art class. Barry's a prominent sculptor. He's a good stone sculpter, and I carved wood at the time. It was such a little town back in the day when Barry and I were there. Like I said, we had one little blinking yellow light in town.
They were coming down the river in a pontoon, homemade pontoon. They was up on my sandbar having troubles, so I went up there in my boat and told them to come down to my ramp, and I'd help them all I could, and that's how I first met them. Then my wife, she put it on the computer on Facebook about them making the trip, and it just exploded and went viral instantly. So then they had a lot of followers on that, I believe.
I learned about Curtis and Barry's trip one day while idly browsing Facebook. I think one of my friends shared the post by White River Rentals, and I started reading about their fascinating endeavor, and it stopped me in my tracks. I knew right then that I should offer to help however possible, so that's when I reached out to Barry.
We found that very interesting, very neat that the father and son was going on such a trip like that. We knew it was going to take them a long time and be challenging, and I think that's what got her attention. Felt like she ought to share it with everybody. They were tired and exhausted. We didn't know what they was doing at the time, but we learned that they were headed to New Orleans. It was him and his father for, I believe it might have been his 90th birthday or something. They were having nothing but problems because of a low river. They broke down at their saw and their boat too, so we just fixed their saw for them, got it going, kind of encouraged them to not give up, and fixed a few things for them, helped them all we could, which they were pretty self-sufficient. They didn't need much help. Just give them a safe place to sleep and offered my assistance in any way possible. Whatever they needed, we was at their convenience, hopefully.
Barry called me, and I had kind of heard a little bit about the shanty that he was building, that he was going to try to make it down the Ohio River and eventually in the Mississippi. And he called me up and kind of said, hey, we tried this thing and it didn't work. And he said, is there a chance that you'd have a pontoon, or some type of a used pontoon? Well, it's kind of rare that we have those, but it just so happened I did. And the interior was a little rough, but it didn't matter. He was going to design it like he wanted. So we beefed up the motor and got things going, donated a couple propellers and some oil, and I delivered it to his house.
I helped them a lot. I definitely helped them a lot. the more I thought about this, I kind of feel like I'm probably one of the few people on the face of this planet who was uniquely positioned to help Curtis and Barry through their journey. But more importantly, I possessed a love of the river, and I was always so interested in the history of the river. Plus, for close to 6 months, I flew support missions for Governor Bobby Jindal during Operation Deepwater Horizon. So then after seeing the post by White River Reynolds, I reached out to Barry and I shared my background, and I asked him if he thought it would be a good idea to maybe create a page to share news of their adventures. And I felt a little awkward about reaching out to him, but I did my best to assure him that I was trustworthy and I had their best interest at heart. So I'm really happy that Curtis and Barry agreed to trust me with sharing their, kind of being the curator of their adventure. And then once they agreed, I set up their page called Curtis and Barry's Mississippi River Adventure. Then I encouraged all my friends to like the page and follow along with all the various ups and downs of their surreal trip. I also created like a cloud account for storage of photos and video. And this turned out to be critical, a very valuable effort because of what happened later when Barry dropped his phone in the river. We would talk every day. We kind of got into a rhythm, and usually every morning and every evening we would touch base, and I would wait for Barry to send pictures and video, and then I would usually mix his narrative in with historical information that I basically just gleaned off the internet and Wikipedia. I put a lot of thought into crafting the content that we shared. We wanted to be careful about keeping them safe, so we were definitely mindful about when and how much we shared. I did quite a few other things for Curtis and Barry too, besides setting up their Facebook page and documenting their story. I also scouted out potential pitfalls or things of interest on their daily journey, and I provided logistical support as often as possible to kind of smooth the way. I know that there were times that I was really just worried sick about what they were up to, like I hope everything's going okay. And as a Black Hawk pilot, of course, I've flown across the Mississippi River countless times, and I felt like the odds were totally stacked against them. But one of the gentlemen who knew the Paytons from their hometown actually commented on the Facebook page, and he said something that really stuck with me. And he said, if anyone can make this happen, Barry can. I feel like everything was special about their trip. And early on, I was not entirely certain about the outcome of the journey. Would they make it? Would they succeed? But day by day, they hung in there. They made painstaking progress. So seeing that play out was incredibly thrilling and interesting. And encapsulating all the things that make this trip extra special is pretty hard. But the fact that Curtis was 90 years old when they started this adventure is incredibly inspirational. I think people will find that inspiring. The last thing that made it really super special, I think, is that Barry's tenacity and seeing the trip through was beyond incredible. And anybody who followed along with our updates on social media surely picked up on what a once-in-a-lifetime event this was.
I met Barry, of course, through high school, and then when he called me and said that he needed some help, and then we got into the trip, and when I recap that trip, it's just very memorable to me. And I think a lot of it is, Mother was here at my home visiting at the time, and I asked her if she'd like to go on a trip with me to take this boat to Barry and Curtis, and it was in an area where we grew up, and she eagerly said yeah. And we went, and as I delivered the boat, and Curtis and my mother sat under a shade tree as Barry and I went through the boat and everything, and then afterwards we left and had a lunch. And since then Mother's gone and passed, so to recap that trip just brings back a real special memory of traveling with Mother and meeting Barry and Curtis.
There were several reasons that I felt compelled to help Curtis and Barry. First, their story was so unique that I felt moved by their desire to do something so remarkable. And it was almost unthinkable that here they were doing this. And I think also a lot of Americans are are pretty captivated by Mark Twain's stories of Tom Sawyer. And for me, I've always been enthralled with the romance and nostalgia of the Mississippi River, as well as the lore that accompanies this history of a very important waterway in America. But, ultimately their story really resonated with me, and I felt like their adventure was one that people should hear. And I knew I had the skills to help them reach a larger audience. And I hope that others would be touched by their incredible story the way that I was.
I think it just really, the bond that those two have, I encourage them to continue that as much as they can while they still have that relationship. It's something that I know they're going to treasure for their entire life. And it really means something to me to know a couple special people like that.
I'm glad you guys are doing all right and glad you made it okay. We watched you all the way. And it was a pleasure meeting you, and if we've done anything to help you, I'm real glad.
I'm really incredibly grateful to the gracious folks who followed along and supported Curtis and Barry through kind words and offers of assistance through the social media page. And there were so many people who consistently made the time to leave words of encouragement for Curtis and Barry. So that was incredibly meaning, I think, for all of us. I think Barry really hit the nail on the head when he said that people just kept randomly showing up at the right place and the right time. And for whatever reason, I'm glad I was able to be there for them, because the end result was pretty magical.